All right, so it is day 3 of our NBA All-Star project. And so on day 3, we are looking at scatter plots. So we're going to make sure we're on the scatter plot tab, which you'll notice is actually already filled out for you as well, because this is where we filled out all of our information on day 1. So we have points, assists, and rebounds for players 1, 2, and 3 that we chose to look at. And now we just need to turn these numbers, all my data, into a scatter plot. So it gives me more of a visual representation of my data. So you start by clicking the empty box right under games, and I am going to highlight all the way over to player 3, and I'm only doing this for points because I only want my scatter plot to consist of their points per game. All right, so now that that's all highlighted for all 20 games, I'm going to hit Insert, Chart, and I found that the old chart editor actually works a lot better. So if you click Use Old Chart Editor, it'll pop up on your screen. And it shows up as a line graph. Well, we want scatter plot because we want to see, well, how many points were scored per game. And so I'm going to scroll all the way down under my chart types, and I'm going to click Scatter. Now I'm going to go back to customization, and I'm going to retitle my graph Points Comparison. All right, so now that I've named my graph, I also need to name my axes. So right now my axis is at my horizontal axis, and that is my X. So I'm going to label my X-axis my game numbers. So game number. And that way, when I'm looking at this axis, I can see that from 0 to 20 games were played. So now I'm going to click this drop-down arrow, and I'm going to click my vertical axis. So I want to name that as well. So we are going to name that points scored. So that way I can see anywhere from 0 to almost 50 points were scored in one game. All right, so now I'm going to scroll down and you will see series, and my player 1 is already on there. And so what I need to do now is I need to insert a trend line. So right now it says that there's none, so I'm going to click trend line and I'm going to click linear. So what that does is it takes all of my blue dots and it finds the middle over my 20 games. So it gives you more of a visual that my player 1 is actually decreasing the amount of points per game over these 20 games. So he hasn't scored as much as he was in the beginning of the season. So now I'm going to go to my series and I'm going to click player 2. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to insert a linear trend line. And so player 2 is also decreasing their points per game over time. And now player 3, insert linear, and he has actually increased over the season, which makes sense because if you look down here, he had 0 points scored per game at the beginning of the season, and so now he's scoring a lot more than that. So you can see that increase. So now I'm going to click Update, and it places it into my data. And now I'm going to shrink it down, and I'm going to move it over to where it says Place Your Graphs Below. So I'm just going to place my point comparison right below there. So now I'm going to do the same thing for my assists. So I'm going to click that empty box under games. I'm going to highlight player 1, 2, and 3 and scroll all the way down to the 20 games that they have had assists for. And I am going to click Insert, Chart. Again, I'm going to use the old chart editor. And that pops up. Click Chart Types because we don't want a line graph, we want scatter. I'm going to go to Customization and I'm going to rename my graph, and this time I'm going to name it Assists Comparison. So Assist Comparison. I'm going to scroll down so I can label my axes. So right now my horizontal axis is going to be game number. My vertical axis is going to be assists recorded. So you can see that 0 to 15 assists were recorded over their games, their 20 games. And now I'm going to scroll down to series, and I can see player 1 is highlighted, and now I'm going to add my trend lines. So click linear, and player 1 again has decreased from the beginning of the season, so he has had less assists per game. Player 2, trend line linear. Player 2 has increased, so they've had more assists over the season. And player 3 has also increased their assists over the season. So now I'm going to click update. I am going to shrink down my graph, and I'm going to move it underneath my points comparison. All right, now I'm going to go to games. Click that empty box under games, and I'm going to do the same thing for rebounds. So I'm going to highlight my 3 players all the way down to their 20 games. Insert, chart, use Alt Chart Editor, chart types. We need to go back to scatter plot, customization. I'm going to label this rebounds comparison. I need to then name my horizontal and vertical axis. So my horizontal axis is game number, just like all the other one. And now I'm going to click that drop down, vertical axis, and I'm going to say rebounds recorded. So I can see anywhere from 0 to 12 rebounds have been recorded throughout the season. I'm going to scroll down to series. Player 1's highlighted. I need to add those trend lines. So player 1 has decreased their rebounds over time. Let's go to player 2. Linear. Player 2 has increased their rebounds over the season. And player 3 has also increased their rebounds over the season. So now I'm going to click update. I'm going to shrink down my graph, and then I'm going to move it underneath my assists. And so what this allows me to do now is I can visually see how my players are doing over the season, and I can then use these comparisons to help me decide which player I want for my team. So I'm going to use these, analyze these, and then I'm going to answer 4 and 5 on my project questions, as well as my final question. All right, now it's your turn.